welcome back to our channel. Today we are going to delve into the fascinating historical Marion County location known as the Ma Barker House. We're embarking on a journey into the dark underworld of Ma Barker. She was a notorious criminal figure from the early 20th century. So join us as we uncover her secrets of her infamous hideout, again known as the Ma Barker home. It's located right here in Marion County on Lake Weir. Let's go ahead and talk about how Ma Barker and the home and everything going on at that time helped change the career of J. Edgar Hoover and helped create what we now know as the FBI. Before we dive into the details of the Ma Barker home, let's go ahead and get some history. Let's shed some light on the woman herself. Ma Barker, whose real name was Kate Barker, before that Arizona. She was born in 1873 in Missouri, and she would go on to become one of the most infamous female criminals in American history, bar none. Her, along with her 4 sons, were involved in various criminal activities, including bank robberies for sure, but also kidnappings, and that was all during the 1920s going into the 1930s. So Ma Barker was known for her very influential role in organizing and managing the Barker Karpus gang. Now that is up for debate, but that is definitely, she was part of that, which that gang included her 4 sons, Arthur or Doc Barker, Fred Barker, Herman Barker, and Lloyd Barker. Together, they carried out a series of violent crimes across the Midwest, leaving a trail of chaos and fear in their wake. You've probably heard of similar criminal gangs at that time. It was very common. There was Bonnie and Clyde. At the time they were killed in 1934, they were believed to have committed 13 murders and several robberies and burglaries. So Clyde Barrow was suspected of murdering 2 police officers in Missouri himself. Now, you may have also heard of Machine Gun Kelly. He was kind of active around 1927, but in spite of his enduring fame and very violent nickname, Machine Gun Kelly never killed anyone. His wife actually gave him not only the machine gun, but also the nickname. He was actually never known for firing his Tommy gun, that gift from his wife, on anything but tin cans. Also known, the American gunman and bank robber, noted for his very vicious killings and youthful looks, you may have heard of the name Babyface Nelson. He used to work for Al Capone from like 1929 to 1931. He worked for other bootleg bosses, but Capone most people have heard of. He was let go from Al Capone's gang because he was too violent for them. He then turned to bank robberies, so he joined with somebody named John Dillinger. He was a very callous, very violent killer. He had a very bad temper. Eventually, even Dillinger, after 2 jobs together, he refused to rob banks with him anymore. Nelson ended up killing 3 FBI agents and was responsible for at least 4 other deaths. He was also the protege of Alvin Karpus of the Barker Karpus gang. So how did all these gangsters know each other? From prison, in most cases. They all seem to have spent time together in one way or another in prison. So how did they get away with hundreds of bank robberies that these people alone that I've just mentioned did? They honestly had a lot of the public on their side. People were angry at banks for failing during the Great Depression. A lot of people saw the robberies as payback. They hid the fugitives sometimes, helped them flee from the law enforcement. Just a lot of craziness was going on. For example, John Dillinger, he led the Dillinger gang, which was accused of robbing 24 banks and 4 police stations. That's right, he actually robbed police stations. But he was seen by the public as a Robin Hood. He was actually in prison several times and escaped at least twice. Once because he carved a gun out of a block of wood and then used shoe polish on it, and used this to intimidate the guards into letting him out. He was definitely a criminal, but not really a murderer. He was, convicted of a lot of crimes, but he was only charged with one murder, and he was never convicted of it. That was in East Chicago, Indiana. A police officer who shot Dillinger in his bulletproof vest during a shootout. He actually ended up dying, but it was not Dillinger that killed him. But Dillinger was charged with the homicide. In the early 1930s, criminal gangs carried out a huge number of bank robberies all across the Midwest. They also did kidnappings. They stole from high-powered and influential people. They used their superior firepower and their fast getaway cars to elude local law enforcement agencies and to avoid arrest. There was no way any of these small local police stations were in any way capable of competing with this. Many of these criminals frequently made newspaper headlines across the United States, especially John Dillinger, who became very famous for leaping over bank cages and repeatedly escaping from jails and police traps and all sorts of stuff. So the gangsters actually enjoyed a level of sympathy even from the Midwest, from everybody, even though they were robbing banks and bankers. Those banks and bankers were widely seen as oppressors of common people during the Great Depression, which is when all of this was going on. So the robbers operated across state lines, and so Hoover, who was really trying to advance his career, pressed to have their crimes recognized as federal offenses so that he and his men, at the time called the Bureau of Investigation, they would have the authority to pursue these people and get the credit for capturing them. Because again, who are they going after? They're going after these rich and influential people. Well, protect them and you got a good career. Especially since that would put him in a good light with all of those, because they're all friends of friends of friends. Anyway, so initially, he didn't do so well. He actually came under scrutiny after Hoover suffered some really embarrassing foul-ups, in particular with Dillinger and his conspirators. There was a raid on a summer lodge in Wisconsin called Little Bohemia, and it kind of left the Bureau, the whole agency and everything just really not so great, because a Bureau agent was hurt and so was a civilian bystander. The bystander was dead. So yeah, and then all the gangsters escaped. So there was just nothing good that came out of that. So Hoover realized that his job was on the line. So he pulls out all stops to capture all of the culprits. He just wants to get all of them. One of the first was Machine Gun Kelly. He's probably the easiest. That's probably why he was the first. But he got him in July 1934. Actually, Purvis, the director of operations in the Chicago office, he then gets a tip on Dillinger's whereabouts. And that paid off when Dillinger was located. And he was actually ambushed, and then he was killed by Bureau agents outside the Biograph Theater, which is well known at this point. So Hoover was credited for overseeing several highly publicized captures or shootings of outlaws and bank robbers. So these included those, like I mentioned, Machine Gun Kelly's capture in mid-1933, the death of Dillinger in 1934, Arthur Barker in January of 1935, and then having one of the longest shootouts in history with Ma Barker and her other son, Fred Barker, only 8 days after that. Unfortunately for Hoover, at April 1936, a United States Senate hearing was held, and there was a Tennessee senator, Senator McKellar, who lambasted him for the fact that Hoover himself had never personally arrested anyone. So after the hearing, Hoover was super determined, so he vowed that he would capture Karpis personally. So on May 1st, 1936, the FBI located Karpis in New Orleans, and Hoover flew in so that he could be in charge of the arrest. It was kind of shenanigans at that point, but whatever. So as a dozen or so agents swarmed all over Karpis's car, Hoover announced to Karpis that he was under arrest. There you go. He captured him. The capture of Karpis catapulted Hoover's name, though, into the public light. And that name would be synonymous with law enforcement until he died in 1972 at the age of 77. So it was a really, really big deal for him to actually have arrested Karpis. Also, the capture of Karpis essentially ended the age of these big-name Depression-era criminals. That was it. That was the end of it. The Ma Barker and the Barker-Karpis gang, that ended it. So let's go ahead and focus on this infamous hideout we have here, often referred to as the Ma Barker home. It's located in Ocklawaha, Florida, here in Marion County. It's this really secluded residence that became the setting for the final chapter of Ma Barker's criminal career. It was in this really idyllic lakeside property that's absolutely gorgeous that the FBI eventually confronted and ended the Barker Karpis gang. So the Ma Barker home was a very modest two-story home. It was nestled among these moss-covered oaks, which you'll still see today, and all these cypress trees. And it was constructed in the late 1920s. So it's really a beautiful home, really. It has a lot of natural surroundings, and it's just a very peaceful retreat. The perfect summer home, really. However, this facade concealed the secrets of a criminal empire. They were in there hiding out. They invited other criminals to come visit. They were there for weeks and weeks, actually a couple months. The house boasted multiple bedrooms. It had a kitchen. It has a large living area. And at the time, having indoor bathrooms and plumbing was actually pretty cool. The FBI, led by this agent Purvis, had been relentlessly pursuing Barker Karpis gang for years. So on January 16, 1935, after months of surveillance and investigation, the FBI closed in on the Ma Barker home. It was this huge shootout, and it lasted hours. The authorities finally neutralized the gang, but there was only two people in there, Ma Barker and her son Fred. They were killed during the confrontation. None of the agents were actually killed. It's a really grim reminder of those really dark days of the organized crime here in America. It's almost a symbol of the era when notorious gangs were just running wild. They were kidnapping for ransom. They were robbing banks, jailbreaks, and high-speed chases with souped-up cars. It was just a whole thing back then. The home itself was originally located on a property owned by Carson Bradford, which is why sometimes you'll see it referred to as the Bradford Barker home. Carson Bradford bought the real estate in Ocklawaha in 1892, and his son was living in Miami. He built the house in 1930. It was a two-story Florida cracker-style home. It's got 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a total of about 2,100 square feet. No garages, but they did have some outbuildings and stuff like that. If you ever look at the FBI stuff, you'll see the little outbuildings. The home was quiet. It was nestled far back from the street. It had a beautiful view of the Lake Weir, which is the 5th largest lake in Florida. This Bradford home was built just for basically a weekend and summer retreat from Miami. I mean, if you're coming up from Miami, it's actually cooler up here, right? So Carson Bradford had never actually rented his house out, ever. But in 1934, he was surprisingly generous offer. He got a generous offer from Mrs. T.C. Kate Blackburn. And he described her as a sweet little old lady who was looking for an out-of-the-way cottage to spend some quality time with her sons. That was their spiel. They needed a place to rest and recuperate away from all the northern winter. So Bradford said that the house wasn't for rent. However, they weren't really wanting to take no for an answer. The rent offer went up and up, and they offered to pay cash in advance for the entire season. It is the only time the house was ever rented. You got some pretty bad tenants there. You should have done a background check there, my friend. So 2 months later, the Bradford house is riddled with bullets. It's the scene of the longest FBI shootout in history. And only once the shooting was over did Bradford learn who the true identity of his tenants are. He had inadvertently rented it out to the notorious gangster Ma Barker and her son Fred. And many, many gangsters had been staying in the house for several weeks. It was actually the FBI that they were fleeing. They knew that they were public enemy number 1. And after the FBI caught or killed John Dillinger, actually, followed by Al Capone, Pretty Boy Floyd, basically the Barker Karpis gang knew Hoover was coming for them next. So finding this out-of-the-way overlooking hideout, overlooking Lake Weir, it was like a really smart move at that time. Today, the home is still on Lake Weir, but it was moved as a historical building by the county, and it's actually located very close to the Carney Island boat launch in the park over there, if you've ever seen it, but you can't see the house from the park. They give tours of the home, but they are booked out a year in advance right now. It's mostly run by volunteers, people that are really enchanted with history, the same as I am. It's a house with serious history, okay? Serious history right here in Marion County. How could I possibly pass up a house with history? You can't do it. Not as a realtor. Just couldn't do it. So I went out and took a look, and I took the tour. I had to wait like 6 months at the time. The first thing that strikes you as you walk through is that nothing is taped off. Nothing. You can roam freely throughout the house. The next thing you're going to notice is all of the bullet holes. They're still there. All of them. And they're everywhere. Okay, not just the walls, but the furniture as well. The furniture is original. The home was continued to be used by the family as a lake home up until 2014. They never moved a single piece of furniture. The volunteers that are providing the tour, they've actually taken the time to print out the original FBI pictures from the shootout. And you can see exactly which chair Fred Barker used to sit in for several hours as he shot back at the federal agents at the time known as the Flying Squad. Craziness, absolute craziness. You can see exactly where Fred and Ma Barker perished. And while some kind of felt the need to like take pictures of themselves lying in the exact same position, in the exact same spot on the floor, I felt it was a little too morbid for my taste, but I definitely thought that the chair with all of the bullet holes was pretty cool. So I did sit in that. I mean, it's literally like they took 1935 and just moved it. It's crazy. It's pretty cool. So there's actually very few locations in the home that didn't get like scoured with bullets. Both upstairs and down, because Fred was shooting from upstairs and Ma Barker was shooting from downstairs by the front door. And they're shooting at federal agents, and the agents were shooting back. So it was a little bit of mayhem. If you're a history buff, there is literally nothing closer to walking around in 1935 than visiting this historic home. It's impossible. It's been in a time capsule pretty much. It has had a little bit of updating for safety, like electrical work stuff done. But there's the original pipes in a closet, and it's showing exactly how they established their indoor plumbing back in the 1930s. So I mean, I was just interested just in the house itself, just as a regular house, much less all the history and the bullet holes. It is fascinating. There's actually still an original refrigerator still in the kitchen that just fascinated me. I was looking at the cord and the plug and stuff. I mean, it was just crazy. So from what I understand, they've had a lot of requests to turn this home into a wedding venue, so that couples can get married in like a gangster style setting. So I don't really know if that's for me, but I wouldn't mind being invited to something like that. I mean, that's pretty unique. So I would say if you have a chance to take the tour of the Ma Barker house, you definitely should. You're going to find something of interest. I absolutely promise you. You can book the tour at mabarkerhouse.org and just really enjoy. It was definitely warm though, so try and get it on more of the cooler months is my suggestion. Bring a bottle of water with you and just really enjoy it. Be prepared to walk around though. All right, I hope that you enjoyed this very interesting insight into some of the odd history that we have here in Marion County. If you have any questions, go ahead and hit me up in the comments below. And I guess if you're interested in purchasing some real estate here in Marion County, let us know. That one's not for sale though. You guys have a great day and thanks for watching.
Move with the rhythm, shake it up, stop when the clock hits there.